By late afternoon, everything fell apart. The day had started with the usual grind: wake up, get the kids ready, kiss them goodbye, head to my construction foreman job. Nothing remarkable. Payday meant a stop at the ATM, except the machine swallowed my card without a word. No cash, no card, no help. Maddie's birthday was Sunday, and now even the gift money was gone. Frustrated, I drove home. But something felt wrong the moment I pulled into the driveway. Tracy's car was gone. My stomach tightened. She knew better than to leave the kids alone in the house again. I reached the door, and before I could turn the key, a stranger's voice called my name. "Mr. David Brown?" I turned to find a middle-aged man handing me a yellow envelope. "You've been served," he said, and walked off. I stood there, stunned, then went inside to a house that felt eerily hollow. It didn't take long to confirm why. It was empty. Completely. Every trace of my wife and kids, gone. No goodbye, no note, no message, just silence. And that damn envelope. Inside were legal documents that shattered my world: a divorce petition, a notice to vacate and sell the house within 2 months, a request from some man, Michael Smith, to adopt my children, and a restraining order keeping me 200 yards away from everyone I loved. The shock was paralyzing. My life had been gutted in one coordinated strike, and I hadn't seen it coming. Tracy, the woman I thought I knew, had vanished, taking our kids, closing our accounts, gutting our future, and replaced herself with some faceless man I'd never even heard of. Michael Smith. The name rang a faint bell. TV ads? Supermarket owner? Yeah, some flashy guy who'd hijacked a grocery chain a couple years back. Now he was hijacking my family. My mind reeled. 6 months ago, Tracy had started acting distant. Then suddenly, things between us got better, much better. She became someone else, bold, uninhibited. I thought it was a spark reignited. Now I realized it wasn't me that brought her to life. It was him. The worst part? I hadn't seen a single red flag. I thought she'd changed for me. Truth is, she'd stopped respecting me long ago, and I was too blind to notice, and yet, somehow I didn't fall apart. Not yet. Something in me clicked. The numbness shifted into resolve. I needed answers, and I needed a plan. I was never one to follow rules to the letter. My boss once joked, "Dave doesn't follow the manual. He writes it." That rebellious streak was about to be my greatest tool. 30 minutes later, I was parked just shy of 200 feet from 12 Riverview Drive. Tracy's car sat in the driveway like it belonged there. I stared at the house. Big, lavish, just like every other house on that upscale street. And then it hit me. Michael Smith was the guy from those smug commercials. Only this time, his face wasn't just on my screen. He was in my life, and he declared war. I was still parked outside the house, caught in my thoughts, when the front door opened and a man stepped out. I recognized him instantly. It was the same guy who'd served me earlier with that damned envelope. He got in his car and drove off. That was the push I needed to finally open the papers he handed me. Tracy hadn't just left me. She was going for the jugular, demanding the house, the car, alimony, child support, every cent we had, and worst of all, full custody. I wouldn't even get to see my kids. That was Tracy for you. It was never enough to win. She had to completely annihilate whoever stood in her way. I was still reeling when the door opened again. A woman in a tailored coat stood outside, suitcase at her side. A man, likely her husband, dropped the bag next to her and closed the door without a word. She stood there, frozen, gripping a yellow envelope, the same kind as mine. When she started walking, her face mirrored mine, shocked, hollow. As she passed my car, I stepped out and held up my envelope. Click. She looked at mine, then at hers, and then she just broke down in tears. I quietly loaded her suitcase into my trunk and opened the door. We didn't say a word as I drove around the block a few times, avoiding attention. Somehow, having her beside me, just as blindsided and broken, snapped me out of my fog. She was still beautiful, even through red, tear-filled eyes. But I could tell she wasn't in any shape to lead the conversation, so I did. "I'm Dave," I said gently. "I think your husband met my wife." She looked up at me with a sad, tired smile. "I'm Wendy, your wife. Is she Tracy?" I nodded. "I found them in bed together last month," she said, then started crying again. I waited silently, letting her grieve. Oddly, hearing confirmation of Tracy's affair didn't hit me as hard as I expected. Maybe I'd already run out of shock. "Do you have anyone I can take you to?" She shook her head. No family here, and thanks to Michael, no friends left either. Have you eaten? She shook her head again. I checked my wallet, barely $50. I took her to a cheap local diner I trusted. Over dinner, we traded life stories. I was 32, married young, dropped out of college when Tracy got pregnant. She was against pregnancy termination, so I quit school to support us. She never worked, and I tried to believe we had a solid marriage, though I quietly resented how lazy she'd become. Publicly, she played the doting mom. Privately, she was self-absorbed. I kept quiet for the kids' sake. They were all I had left. No siblings, no parents, just them. Wendy was 41, raised by a single father after her mom left. Her dad died young from stress. She married Michael, a much older man, and they never had kids. He refused to get tested, blamed her, and burned through her inheritance, expanding his business. I suggested she try the ATM outside, just to confirm her cards had been shut down too. No surprise, they had. It was a well-executed ambush. We were blindsided, broke, and overwhelmed. But at least we weren't alone. Back at my place, I offered her the guest room. Just a safe space, nothing more. She accepted. We opened a bottle of wine and sat at the table. Two strangers, bound by shared betrayal. At one point, when I spoke about my fear of losing access to my kids, she gently placed her hand over mine. When I choked up, she cried for me, something I couldn't do for myself. It felt less like a conversation and more like mutual therapy. By the time the bottle was empty, we both understood something important. This wasn't just a fight, it was a war. Our exes had cut us off from everything to prevent us from defending ourselves. But if we stuck together, we might just stand a chance. And for the first time since it all fell apart, I didn't feel completely alone. The next day, Wendy and I tried to keep each other sane. Whenever one of us began to spiral, the other would crack a joke, share a story, or just sit in silence. It wasn't normal, but it worked. Despite everything, we laughed a lot. She was stunning, but surprisingly reserved, even shy. I didn't press. With both our finances gutted, we scraped together what little cash we had and stretched it. Thrift stores, coupons, leftovers. We embraced our new reality like two broke college kids. For Wendy, who'd lived comfortably for years, it was a crash course in survival, but somehow, we made it work. At one point, we tried talking about the future, but the conversation fizzled. Too raw, too soon. That night, we watched a movie instead and didn't speak much. Sunday morning brought the unexpected. Tracy's father, John, and her younger sister, Beth, showed up. I invited them in for coffee. I'd always liked them, and I had a hunch Beth had always liked me too. She'd been single since her husband ditched her for his secretary. As I brewed the coffee, Wendy wandered into the kitchen in her bathrobe. She looked startled, immediately apologizing. John didn't hide his suspicion. Before he could say anything stupid, I cut in. Just so you know, this is the wife of the guy your daughter ran off with. He threw her out Friday. I offered her a place to stay. She's not the only one your daughter tried to destroy. John looked embarrassed. Dave, I'm sorry. Tracy's mother wanted to come, but she's too ashamed. We know what Tracy did. I'm furious with her, but it's complicated. You know, grandkids and... I get it, I said. But what I don't get is why she's doing this. I understand the money grab, the custody ploy, but what's the motive? The look on John's face told me he had no idea how far this had gone. She took everything? He asked, stunned. Everything. The accounts are drained. She served me an eviction notice and banned me from seeing the kids. His eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. Jesus, I had no clue. He took a moment, then finally said, She told us yesterday. It's about money. She says you've hit your ceiling, and she wants more. She doesn't even like the guy, Smith, but she thinks marrying him will get her the lifestyle she wants. I don't think she'll stay with him. Once she's in, she'll gut him and move on. I have no idea how I raised someone like that. I laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from the man who supported her decision to keep the pregnancy that made me drop out of college. I'd be a licensed engineer right now if I'd stayed. John shrugged like it was ancient history. So why take the kids? I asked. We both know she's not exactly mother of the year. I don't know, Dave, he muttered. Beth gave her dad a look, but stayed quiet. They got up to leave. John shook my hand, and I asked him to hug Maddie for me. Beth gave me a tight hug and whispered, I'll be back in an hour. Not long after they left, a couple of mutual friends stopped by. They'd seen Tracy out at dinner with an older man and were confused. Wendy and I told them everything. They were appalled, not just by the betrayal, but by the fact Tracy had taken the kids. Apparently, she still put on the perfect mom act in public. We were still talking when one of Tracy's friends showed up. Same story, same outrage. That's when Beth returned. She pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. $1,000. Let's call it payback on behalf of my sister. I hesitated. It was hard to accept, but I needed it. I thanked her. And one more thing, she said. Dad didn't tell you everything. Tracy came to the house yesterday, picked up the kids, and spilled most of the plan. I got the rest out of her later. Smith wants to adopt your kids. He's childless and sees them as his legacy. Tracy promised him a baby after the wedding to seal the deal. But here's the kicker. She had a hysterectomy during her last C-section. He doesn't know. I just stared at Beth, stunned. The plan was twisted, but made a terrifying kind of sense. Smith wanted an heir. Tracy couldn't give him one. So she was offering my kids instead. If it wasn't so sick, it would have almost been clever. Beth's final revelation hit hard, but it made sense. Tracy's hysterectomy during her last C-section meant she physically couldn't give Smith the child she was promising him. And she'd hidden that from everyone, including him. It wasn't just manipulation. It was calculated deceit. What did she look like when she told you all this? I asked Beth. She tried to act cold, she said, but I could see it. Guilt. She knows what she did to you. She knows she broke a good man. But guilt won't stop her. I nodded, quietly absorbing it. Why are you helping me, Beth? Because it's the right thing. Tracy bullied me growing up, and now she's doing it to you. I've been abandoned before. I know how it feels. You were there for me when I fell apart. Tracy wasn't. So now I'm here for you. I tried to respond, but she cut me off. Relax. I'm not asking to sleep with you. That would be weird. I'm seeing someone, and it's serious. I laughed, surprised by how much I needed that. You've always been my favorite, I said. Thanks, Beth, she smiled. I'm your inside source now. Think of me as your personal spy. After she left, I rejoined Wendy and the others. Later that evening, I split $400 from Beth's gift, gave Wendy half, tucked the rest in a cookie jar. It would hold us over until payday. I told Wendy what Beth had uncovered. She wasn't shocked. Childlessness had always been a sore spot in her marriage. She looked at me and noticed how restless I got around this time of night. What is it about 8:30 that gets to you? She asked softly. That's when I used to read bedtime stories to my kids. Her eyes welled up. So, what are we going to do? My kids are my priority, I said. I won't leave them in the hands of manipulators. I need money, and I won't let Tracy and Smith walk away unpunished. I'm not sure how yet, but I'll figure it out. What about you? Wendy's whole expression changed. Her voice hardened. If Michael had just asked for a divorce and treated me fairly, I'd have let it go, but now I want to see him burn. The fire in her voice made it clear. We were past the point of forgiveness. I grinned at her determination. Well, I said, now we know what we want. Let's talk about how. We stayed up for hours, tossing around ideas. Most were legal. All were frustrating. There just wasn't a clean way to fight people who played dirty. Finally, I asked her more about Smith's finances. Turns out, 2 years ago, he'd leveraged his house, store, and boat to secure a $2.5 million expansion loan. That debt was his weak point. If we could disrupt his business, maybe we'd have enough leverage to negotiate access to my kids. Wendy was ready to torch the place metaphorically. Maybe literally, but I wasn't there. Even a snake like Smith didn't deserve to have his livelihood burned down. Still, the idea had merit. We went to bed way too late. Monday morning, I explained everything to my boss. To his credit, he was supportive, gave me a short leave, and even fronted me some vacation pay. I tried to focus on work, but the ache of missing my kids was constant. In the afternoons, I spent time with the legal counsel and finance officer at the local government office. People often look down on public sector jobs, but we stick together. We don't get rich, but we watch out for one another. And by the end of that week, I knew a whole lot more about legal loopholes, business finance, and how to play dirty without crossing the line. The morning started like any other, with Wendy and I sitting in the kitchen, going over the chaos of the previous day. She'd spent hours job hunting. She used to be an accounting assistant before giving it all up for marriage. Now she was cooking dinner in my kitchen, like we'd known each other forever. We were cleaning up when the phone rang. Daddy, where are you? Daddy? Maddie's tiny voice came through, cracking my heart wide open. I'm here, baby, at home. I don't like it here. Please. Then I heard Tracy's voice. Madeline, who are you talking to? Click. The line went dead. I froze, fury rising in my chest. Wendy saw my face twist and asked what happened. I told her. She rushed to block the front door as I moved to leave. "Don't do it, Dave. That's exactly what they want. You show up and they call the cops for violating the restraining order." Her words cut through the rage. Instead of storming out, I climbed the stairs, locked myself in my room, and collapsed on the bed. A while later, there was a gentle knock. Wendy stepped in carrying 3 children's books. "Can you read me a story?" she asked softly. I stared at her, then at the books. Without a word, I made space on the bed. She curled beside me. I opened Maddie's favorite book and started reading aloud. By the end, the storm in my chest had calmed. I leaned over and kissed Wendy's forehead, just like I used to do with Maddie. She smiled. For weeks, I pushed all thoughts of my kids into the farthest corners of my mind. But the truth was crushing. I might lose them. They might grow up thinking I left. And then the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Sophia, Tracy's closest friend. She and I had always gotten along, but her sudden appearance caught me off guard. I let her in and introduced her to Wendy. Sophia barely made eye contact. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, voice shaking. "Tracy told me everything months ago about the affair, the divorce, the custody. She made me promise not to say anything. That's why I disappeared." I said nothing. Honestly, I wanted her gone. But then I realized something. Guilt is powerful, and it can be useful. "It's okay, Sophia. I get it. You were in a tough spot." She looked up. "You know she emptied your accounts, right? Left me penniless, too." "Yeah, she mentioned it. Sounded proud. But I think it's a front. Deep down, she knows what she did is vile." Sophia held my gaze now, steady and direct. "For the record," she said, "I never believed what she said about you hitting the kids. I've seen you with them. I know you." "What don't I know?" I asked. "She told child services you were abusive. Said there wasn't enough evidence to charge you, but the accusation was enough to get the restraining order." I slumped into my chair, stunned. "She knows I've never laid a finger on them. I was more of a parent than her mom and dad ever were." They both watched me go pale with fury. Every muscle in my body burned with a new kind of anger, ice cold and absolute. If she wanted war, I'd stop fighting fair. "She'll do anything to win," I muttered, "and I won't just sit back and let it happen." Sophia nodded slowly. "I believe you, Dave. Like I said, I've seen real fathers. You're one of them. Tracy? She's running a game I don't want any part of." I filled her in on what we'd uncovered. That Tracy was planning to sell me out, let Smith adopt the kids, and lie about wanting to have a baby with him just to lock in his inheritance. She couldn't have kids anymore, but he didn't know that. "He's desperate for an heir," I said. "By the time he finds out the truth, she'll already have traded our house and savings for a chunk of his empire." Sophia looked horrified. "And what about me?" she asked quietly. "She used me, lied to me. You were her best friend, Sophia, and she let you believe I was abusing my children. What kind of friend is that?" She blinked hard, processing it all. Then without a word, she stood up, murmured an apology, and left. For a moment, I felt sorry for her, but mostly, I felt ready. I was on my way upstairs, ready to collapse under the weight of it all again. But Wendy stopped me. She pulled me into a silent hug. No words, just 2 broken people leaning on each other for warmth in a cold, unfair world. Eventually, I thanked her, and we settled in for the night. I barely slept. My brain spun between fury at Tracy's betrayal and the heartbreak from Maddie's voice on the phone. By 4 a.m., I'd stopped tossing and turning. A plan was already forming. Wendy woke me with sunlight and a smile. "Rise and shine, breakfast's ready." After showering, I called my boss and asked for time off. No hesitation, he approved it instantly. Across the kitchen table, Wendy raised an eyebrow. "So, how far are we going?" I smirked. "Let's just say I'm done playing fair." "Oh," she teased, flipping her hair. "Didn't know you cared that much." I grinned. "I'm thinking, take down his business, destroy her support system, crush both of them into dust. You know, a light touch." "I like the sound of that," she said. "I've got a few ideas myself." Over breakfast, we traded notes. Wendy dove into researching libel and slander laws while I made some calls. First to Tracy's mom, who was stunned to hear Tracy had armed child services without her knowledge. Then Beth, who was furious and ready to disown her sister. I convinced her to stay close to Tracy and become our inside woman instead. Wendy found everything she needed. In our country, the truth is a legal shield. As long as we stuck to facts, we were untouchable. We spent the next hour in my workshop painting bold messages on 2 signs. Half an hour later, we were sitting in lawn chairs outside Michael Smith's store, just off public property, in full compliance with local ordinances. Mine read, "Ask me how the owner of this store stole my wife and kids." Hers, "Ask me about my husband's morals." It didn't take long before Wendy's sign attracted more attention. Can't blame anyone. She was a beautiful woman with a tragic story. Once one person stopped, others followed. We stuck to facts, knowing that truth was our legal armor. And to our quiet delight, most people chose to shop elsewhere after hearing our stories. Around midday, the store manager came out and tried to intimidate us. Wendy recorded my calm response. "Want the police number? I'll dial for you." The cops arrived later, asked us to move back a bit to avoid blocking the entrance, and left us alone. Then a local radio reporter stopped by. We told our story to a growing crowd. What caught their attention most was the part about Tracy accusing me of child mistreatment. Something so serious, most people assumed I wouldn't dare mention it if it weren't true. That evening, we stayed just long enough to wave goodbye to the closing staff and made sure they knew we'd be back. That night, our story made the local news. The footage was clean, factual, and powerful. Next morning, we returned to our posts. Security tried to block us from talking to customers, so this time I called the cops. They returned and politely reminded the manager we had the right to be there. A coffee vendor even set up nearby. It was turning into an event. Wendy played the role of abandoned wife perfectly. She had the look, the posture, even the trembling lower lip. If acting didn't work out, she could have led support groups. While we were distracted by a news van across the street, two men in suits appeared and handed us a cease and desist order. They claimed we were costing the store $30,000 a day. The moment was caught entirely on video. The lawsuit threat vanished quickly once reporters started asking questions. We repeated our mantra: no exaggeration, no drama, just the facts. I stood there holding a letter from Tracy's legal firm. On the surface, it looked threatening. But to the public, it made us look like David standing up to Goliath. As we walked away that evening, the store already shuttered. We saw dozens of people still lingering, waiting for tomorrow's chapter. I joked to Wendy that she should get an agent, but when the news aired, the mood shifted. The cameras had captured our children being hustled away from Smith's mansion after school. Seeing Maddie and James pulled out of sight like they were evidence being hidden, it tore me up inside. That night, I read Wendy another bedtime story. We both needed it. The phone calls started pouring in, 10 or more a day, from friends and acquaintances. Most had caught wind of Tracy's stunt and wanted us to know they stood with us. I thanked them. Their words helped, even as they added weight to the realization. Tracy had become the most hated woman in town, and somehow, it still didn't feel like enough. At 9:30 that night, there was a knock at the door. It was Sophia. She didn't speak, just hugged me tightly, pressed a memory card into my hand, and walked away in tears. Wendy and I immediately plugged it into the computer. What played was explosive, a recording of Sophia confronting Tracy, who confessed, on tape, to lying to child services and manipulating everyone around her. She tried to justify her actions, but in the end, Sophia cut ties with her completely. The recording was gold emotionally, but legally, not so much. We debated anonymously sending it to the media, but it could get Sophia into trouble. As much as we wanted to fight dirty, we still had limits. The next day brought fresh drama, served papers, hand-delivered by none other than Reginald Pike himself. He tried to hit Wendy and me with lawsuits simultaneously, but we took turns filming the whole thing for the record. Sued for tens of thousands by people who knew we had nothing. Pathetic. Despite that, the store looked like a ghost town. Word had clearly spread. Other local businesses were quietly luring customers away. The vultures were circling. We kept filming. Every truck that rolled in was caught on camera, especially the delivery company logos. Maybe they'd reconsider who they did business with. At 2 p.m., 2 employees stepped out and told us layoffs were coming. Wendy interviewed me on the spot, asking other companies to consider hiring the displaced workers. That video went viral by 3:30. Then the state news van rolled up again. 3 men in suits, sans ties, stepped out and announced on camera that they were attorneys offering to represent us pro bono. Wait, I said, that's what pro bono means? Their lead, Brian Colson, explained he was a former partner of Pike and Slugden, the very firm coming after us. Apparently, they'd burned him years ago. Now it was payback. We met at the cafe across the street. By the end of the night, and 15 cups of coffee, we'd signed paperwork. They would represent us in our divorces and in my custody battle. Coulson lit up when we mentioned Sophia's recording, but we didn't hand it over, at least not yet. We were cautious. Still, our story had become regular content in the human interest segments of the nightly news. Coulson, in his open-collar shirt, looked sharp on TV. Honestly, the dynamic reminded me of a remora and a shark. If Coulson wanted to be the shark, that was fine. He fought for us like one. Over the next week and a half, the media attention only grew. My longing for my kids, and Wendy, deepened. Meanwhile, Coulson pushed hard to get us temporary court orders, access to our assets, a motion for Tracy to bring the kids in for supervised visits, and possibly even to vacate the house. Australians love an underdog, and it showed. The public backed us. I think the local news anchor had a soft spot for Wendy too, which didn't hurt. By the end of that week, we had court dates. Mine first, Wendy's immediately after. As we prepared, I realized Coulson had a ruthless streak, and I respected it. On Thursday, we paused our protests. But when we heard customers were sneaking back into the store, we returned Friday morning. Good thing we did. At 9 a.m., Michael Smith himself pulled into the parking lot, tailed by highway patrol. Flashy car, custom plates, not the best look. It took officers a few minutes to find something questionable, but they did. I gave them a cheerful wave as they drove off. Wendy caught Smith entering the store on camera, which proved he initiated contact, potentially violating the restraining order. We had him. An hour later, 2 bankers showed up. "Today's the 24th, right?" Wendy asked. "All day," I said with a grin. "Loan payment day." That night, we kept it simple. My vacation pay had hit our new account, so we celebrated modestly, with a movie instead of our usual quiet night in. Sleep didn't come easily that weekend. Monday's hearing would decide the future of my family. But Saturday brought an unexpected and welcome distraction. An old friend of Wendy's, who had seen our story and tracked her down. Late that afternoon, Tracy's parents and sister Beth stopped by. Wendy kept them entertained while I made a quick store run. She was a natural host, and from what I saw when I returned, the mood was surprisingly upbeat. I couldn't help but wonder why Tracy's family was suddenly warming back up to me. Maybe they'd finally pieced together the truth. Maybe they realized I had the moral high ground, and that siding with me meant staying in their grandkids' lives. While the barbecue sizzled, Beth pulled me aside. "How's your back, Dave?" I gave her a puzzled look. "It's fine." "No stabbing pain where my sister shoved the metaphorical knife?" I laughed. "So Tracy's not thrilled." "Thrilled? Dave, she's losing her mind. You're not following her script. She expected you to grovel. Instead, you're out there publicly exposing everything. You've caught them off guard. Mom and Dad won't even talk to her, and Sophia jumped ship. Tracy and Mick are apparently scared to show their faces in public. Even the country club's buzzing." "Touching," I said dryly. "How are the kids?" "They're okay, sad, confused. I visit every couple of days and try to lift their spirits. Here, look." Beth showed me photos on her camera. Only one caught Maddie smiling, and even then it looked forced. My throat tightened. I thanked Beth for everything, and as we rejoined the others, she theatrically dropped a set of keys. "Oops," she said. "Looks like I dropped the Mercedes keys and the house spare." Clumsy me. We shared a grin. The next morning, I was still groggy when Wendy's voice echoed down the hall. At 10 a.m., Wendy and I headed to court. It was my first official hearing, and the first time I laid eyes on Mick. Middle-aged, balding, with a gut that had clearly arrived years before he did. Wendy stiffened beside me as he entered. Later, she told me he looked nothing like the man she had once fallen for. Tracy's legal team didn't show up themselves. Instead, they sent a junior associate. Coulson smirked. Apparently, they knew each other from years back, but both men played their roles professionally. Coulson laid out our financial argument first. The opposition claimed Tracy needed full access to our assets to support the kids. When Coulson filed for joint custody and requested the children be interviewed by Child Services, they pushed back hard. Then Mick leaned over to Tracy. She'd spent most of the morning shooting daggers at me. They whispered. A moment later, Coulson leaned in. "She wants to make a deal," he said. "She's threatening to go public with accusations of mistreatment. If you give up the kids, she'll walk away from everything else. The house, the money." I looked over. Tracy was smirking like she had already won. Then I turned to Wendy. She gave me a quiet nod, steady and strong. I pulled out a tape recorder from my jacket. Sophia had given me permission to use it if Tracy crossed the line, and this was it. Coulson took it, played a short clip for the other lawyer. I watched the blood drain from his face. Words were exchanged. Tension flared. Unacceptable. Media exposure. I caught fragments as he stormed out. 10 minutes later, he returned and sat silently next to Tracy. The judge was called back. Then the impossible happened. "Your Honor," he said, "due to new evidence, we must withdraw from representing the defendant." Tracy looked stunned. The judge accepted the withdrawal and adjourned the case. Tracy now had 2 weeks to find new counsel. He refused to rule on the financials until custody was addressed and left the restraining order in place, pending a proper hearing. Another 2 weeks without my children. Wendy's hearing came next. The media wasn't outside. They were busy reporting that a law firm had publicly dropped its client. That night, Slugden and Pike issued a press release talking about ethics and conscience. The press had a field day. But I didn't feel victorious. I missed my kids. Wendy started feeling the weight of it too. Guilty about living off my income, worried about burdening me. I reassured her I wouldn't have made it this far without her. The protest outside the store was starting to lose steam. Media interest was waning. I joked that by the end of the week I'd have to strip clothes to get a reporter's attention. Tuesday, I skipped picketing and just watched from a distance, tracking how many customers came and went. Sometimes silence says more than shouting. Right after lunch, I got a call from someone named Henry. He asked me to meet him at a coffee shop on the other side of town. Suspicious but curious, I asked Wendy to keep an eye from a distance, camera ready just in case. Henry turned out to be the assistant manager at Smith's store, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap like he was meeting with a spy, and in a way, he was. He told me something unexpected. The bank was forcing Smith to sell the store. Fast. Cheap. Turns out, he was bleeding the place dry. Now the employees, Henry included, were secretly working with the bank to buy it out. "You sitting outside actually helped," he said. Wendy and I happily resumed our post. Later that week, more good news arrived. Wendy handed our lawyers a packet of documents from an old investment tied to her inheritance. Turns out, she'd unknowingly bought into a business that reinvested profits, and it had quietly ballooned into a small fortune. By Saturday, the store was closed for the day. Overtime cuts. We hosted another barbecue. Beth, her parents, and Wendy's longtime friend came by. Beth gave us an update on the Smith household. Full-blown chaos. Tracy was paranoid, convinced Beth was spying for me. She wasn't wrong. I hadn't heard from the kids in over a week, which gnawed at me. Just as we finished eating, the doorbell rang. It was Tracy. I opened the door. "Aren't you breaking the order by being here?" She shrugged. "Apparently not if I come to you." I stepped aside. She froze when she saw her parents. Wendy glared at her and silently disappeared upstairs, where Beth had already gone. Even her own parents looked like they regretted raising her. Tracy pulled me into the kitchen. "For old time's sake, Dave, could you back off a little?" "Oh, didn't the trade work out like you hoped?" She exhaled sharply. "No, I figured if I cleaned you out, you'd cave and let Mick adopt the kids. Then I'd marry him, convince him I couldn't have kids, and take him for everything." She paused, then added, "I was going to come back to you once I had his money." I just stared. "But now?" she said. "His business is falling apart. We can't go anywhere without people staring. A woman spit on me at a restaurant. The cops pulled me over 3 times this week. I'm 1 ticket from losing my license." Her voice cracked. "Can't you just let me live my dream?" "You know history, right?" I said. "Pearl Harbor? That's what you did to this family. A sneak attack. If you'd just asked for a divorce like a normal human being, this could have ended peacefully. But you didn't. And now, I want full surrender." "You think I'd trade our kids for money?" "Didn't you?" I asked. She looked away, realizing her emotional tactics weren't working anymore. Her mask slipped, and the cold, calculating Tracy returned. "Mick wants to talk tonight. Can you meet?" "Oh, sure," I said. "Let me just stroll into your place and get arrested." "We could come here." "Nope." "Why not?" "Because if Smith steps foot on my property, I'll gladly rip his head off." That rattled her. "What did he ever do to you?" I ticked them off. "Seduced my wife, helped her drain our accounts, tried to erase me from my kids' lives. Pick one." She went quiet again. I could tell she wasn't expecting resistance anymore. "How about Skype?" I offered. "That might work." "What time?" "I'll check with my partner." She frowned. "What partner?" "Wendy. We decide things together." Tracy's mouth curled. "That old witch." Have you seen who you're sleeping with? She's loyal and she's had my back when I needed it. That makes her gold in my book. I went upstairs. Wendy didn't hesitate. Let's do it, she said. What do we have to lose? Back downstairs, I told Tracy, 9 p.m. sharp. She gave her parents a bitter look before leaving, but just before she walked out, she glanced around the house one last time. I swear there were tears in her eyes. The party wound down around 8:30. I set up the laptop across the dining table for the call. Wendy chose to stay off camera. If I never have to see Michael Smith again, she said, it'll still be too soon. At exactly 9 p.m., I logged onto Skype. The screen lit up with Tracy and Mick sitting shoulder to shoulder, all faux composure and smugness. Wendy, fresh from the shower and wrapped in her robe, sat at the kitchen entrance, watching silently from the sidelines. No greetings, no small talk, just cold tension. It was immediately obvious they were playing power games, except their end goals didn't quite match. She wanted control, he wanted closure. And by the end, it was clear Mick was the one calling the shots. He leaned in first. Let's talk straight, Brown. I don't care if I call you David or Mr. Brown. Just pick one and let's go. He expected submission. What he got was my unwavering stare. I'll pick David. But if you want to keep talking, lose the arrogance. His eyes flicked to Tracy. First point, mine. Then came his real offer. You drop your protest at the store, maybe even say it was all a misunderstanding, and I'll sign the house back to you. Half the money, too. You'll get every other weekend with the kids. That's fair, right? I didn't flinch. What about Wendy? He scoffed. What does she matter now? Tracy stayed quiet as Mick continued. We'll toss her 10% of the business profits, once things recover. I glanced at Wendy. Her smirk said everything. She declines your generous offer, I said, tilting my head toward the camera. And as for your custody terms? Stuff them, Mick blinked. Be reasonable. Once I have a kid of my own, I won't care about yours. Tracy's face shifted. Not in horror, just annoyance that he'd spilled the plan. Right, I said. So you want me to hand over my children to a man who sees them as temporary bargaining chips? Got it. Things escalated. Still bitter I left you for a better man? Tracy snapped. Mick stood behind her, placing a hand around her shoulder. Clearly rehearsed. They were trying to provoke me into losing it. Probably recording everything, hoping to use it later. Didn't work. Then I felt a soft hand on my shoulder and warm breath near my ear. Don't turn around, Wendy whispered. Just play along. She leaned in, kissed me softly, then looked at the screen with me. The timing was perfect. Tracy's eyes narrowed with a flicker of something between rage and realization. Get your hands off my husband, you witch, I whispered back to Wendy. Nice move. Was expecting a stunt, she said. Just not from her. Then she vanished, leaving me to face the screen again. I caught our small webcam feed. I didn't need to turn around. I saw it all. And for once, I didn't feel like the one losing ground. Tracy and Mick said something I barely registered. Then came a knock at the door. I answered it. It was my kids. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Maddie clung to my leg. James wrapped his arms around my waist. They looked exhausted, starved, broken. I nearly lost it holding them. Aunt Beth gave me a camera, James mumbled. Wendy arrived, and I asked her to keep our guests distracted on the call. Then I took the kids somewhere quiet. Bit by bit, I pieced together what happened. They'd snuck out in the middle of the night, walked here alone. James had captured a video of Tracy yelling at them during breakfast. Both were shaking from hunger and exhaustion. I gave them warm milk and sat them down. You'll be safe here, I told them. Wendy will stay with you. Back in the kitchen, I called Wendy in to watch the kids, then returned to the laptop. One look at my face and Tracy fell silent, but Mick couldn't help himself. So where are the kids, Tracy? Upstairs, in bed. No, I said. They just walked through the dark to get here. The silence was thick. They haven't eaten properly, I added. Tracy recovered first. We'll come pick them up. No, you won't. The day I leave them with either of you again is the day hell freezes over. And if either of you so much as step onto my street, I will do whatever it takes to keep you away from them. That was the reaction Mick had been fishing for. He grinned. Thanks, man. Then the call cut. After the call ended, I double-checked that the entire Skype session had been recorded. Then I went to find the others. In the living room, Maddie was curled up in Wendy's lap, happily chatting about horses. James sat close by, watching her face like he was trying to memorize safety. I brought out leftover pizza and gently reminded them to eat slowly. I knew what had to be done next. I took the camera from James and copied its contents onto my laptop. I organized everything: Sophia's audio confession, the Skype video, the clip of Mick's careless remark, and a photo of the bruises on Maddie's wrists, into a single folder. About 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Before answering, I gave both kids a long hug and called Beth, asking her to come over. When I returned, Wendy was reading them a bedtime story. At 10:30 p.m., 2 daycare employees showed up at the door, both women, both cold and combative. They insisted they were there to take the children back to their mother. That wasn't going to happen. They pressed their authority, citing legal orders. I sat them down calmly and laid everything out, starting with Maddie's bruises and the explanation she gave, followed by James's account of going hungry. I then showed them video of Tracy screaming at them and the damning moment where Mick said, "Once I have my own baby, I won't care about yours." "Are you really going to send them back to that?" I asked. "After they walked through the dark just to escape?" They squirmed. "I'm sorry, sir," one of them said, "but we have to follow the order. There are allegations that you mistreated the children and your wife. If something happens while they're here, we're liable." I kept my voice even. "Let me be very clear. If you return these children to a place where there's evidence of mistreatment and something happens to them again, I will hold you personally responsible." "Are you threatening us?" "Just painting you a picture." Before things escalated, I offered a compromise. Beth, their aunt, was on her way. I proposed she take temporary custody, neutral ground, so long as both sides agreed not to remove the kids from her care. The older woman left to make a call, presumably to Tracy, and returned with a nod. Agreed. I hugged the kids goodbye, promising I'd fix things. They trusted Beth, so they accepted the change quietly. Wendy didn't say a word as I disappeared for some time to sit with the weight of it all. The next morning, Wendy volunteered to help get the kids ready for school. That became her daily ritual: school drop-off and pick-up to and from Beth's. I returned to work, knowing our public protest had done its job. Henry later confirmed it. Business at the store had tanked, and his plan to buy it out was working. By Monday, we were back in court before the same judge. The financial side had already been settled. This time, it was all about custody. Wendy's case came first. Both sides laid out their version of her financial entanglement with Mick, especially the dividends he'd withheld. Mick clearly thought this part would stay buried. He looked like he might faint when it came to light. Their legal team was unimpressive, firm from out of town, barely competent. The judge ordered a forensic review of the unpaid dividends, but hinted that the asset split would favor Wendy, 65/35. He also made a pointed remark about punishing Mick for his behavior. Wendy made it clear she had no interest in the house. "It's his trophy, let him keep it." Then it was my turn. Their side, in a surprising move, submitted the Skype recording, clearly hoping my outburst would paint me as unstable. They played only the part where I'd threatened to keep the kids away from them. Tracy then took the stand and repeated her claims of mistreatment. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Beth and Sophia were called next. Their testimonies crushed whatever narrative Tracy had built. Beth spoke so powerfully that the judge had to double-check. "You're her sister?" Tracy looked blindsided and stormed out of the courtroom mid-session. When I finally took the stand, Coulson handled it perfectly. He started with the kids' midnight walk, then walked me through the hunger issue, hammering home the fact that neither parent in the other household had even noticed. He followed that up with Child Services interviews of the children. Because the opposition had introduced the Skype clip, they had no grounds to block the rest of it, especially the moment where Mick casually declared he'd stop caring once he had a biological child. Coulson then moved to introduce the video James had filmed. The other side objected. The judge's response was swift and sharp. "This isn't a criminal court," he said. "The standard here is the best interest of the children. I'll allow the video, and while it plays, Mr. Coulson, I'd also like to listen to that other tape, the one I've heard rumors about." The courtroom was dead silent when the audio played, Tracy yelling at her kids to make their own breakfast. But it was nothing compared to the bombshell that followed. A 10-minute recording of her admitting to Sophia that she'd lied to Child Services, fabricated claims that I was abusive. She even said it was Mick's idea. The judge didn't say a word during the final 4 minutes. He just stared at Tracy while she sat with her head in her hands. Mick looked just as stunned. Clearly, no one had told them why Slugden and Pike had walked away from their case. When the judge asked the opposing attorney if he had an explanation, the man just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Brown, can you explain the threat you made toward your ex-wife and her partner?" I've also heard allegations about threatening behavior toward child services workers. I was ready. Yes, Your Honor, I said, rising. You've seen the evidence. My children were neglected, mistreated, and pulled from me under false claims. My job, no, my privilege, is to protect them. I'd risk my freedom, my reputation, anything to keep them safe. And yes, I made that threat. I'd do it again. The judge didn't scold me. In fact, I caught a flicker of approval in his eyes before he nodded and recessed. Less than an hour later, he returned with his ruling. Full custody was granted to me. Tracy's visitation rights would be entirely at my discretion. Coulson audibly exhaled. He'd never seen anything like it. The judge also awarded me the house and 65% of our liquid assets, citing Tracy's deceptive tactics as justification for the lopsided outcome. The press practically exploded. I don't remember what I said to the reporters outside. I was floating. Wendy took the kids home while I gathered their things from the mansion. Tracy and Mick shouted at each other the entire time. Back home, I collapsed on the couch with the kids. That night, they wanted Wendy to read them bedtime stories instead of me. Fair enough. I'd read each book so many times I could recite them in my sleep. The next night, we threw a party. Coulson and his team were the guests of honor. A couple of journalists showed up, and I overheard Coulson casually drop pro bono into a conversation. He earned it. Tracy's family came, along with many mutual friends and Wendy's new circle. Even my boss showed up, joking about having a celebrity on staff. I raised a toast to Beth. On of the year. Later that night, as the crowd thinned out, I sat at the table with Beth and her mom, while Wendy read to the kids across the room. John snoozed on the couch nearby. Then my former mother-in-law dropped the big one. Dave, how often are you going to let Tracy see the kids? I'd been thinking about that all day. I guess it depends on her. If she wants to be in their lives and do right by them, I won't stand in her way. Every child needs a loving woman's influence to grow up balanced, right? She stared at me. Dave, she said, you're a smart man, but sometimes you're completely clueless. What? Your kids are sitting over there with a woman who clearly loves them. And you? I turned, fast. Wendy looked up and saw the three of us staring at her. She blushed, catching on immediately. I stood and walked over. This won't win any awards, I said, but the role of mom seems to be vacant. Interested in applying? She rose without a word and wrapped her arms around me. We kissed, long and deep, with the kids sandwiched between us like two snuggly sardines. It felt exactly right. Later that night, after saying goodbye to the guests and tucking the kids in, I scooped Wendy up and carried her to our room. On the threshold, she asked, "Have you proposed yet?" I thought I did. Did I say yes? Not officially, she smiled. Maybe I'll support you through school. You can be an engineer yet. Sounds perfect to me. Grandma might disagree, though. Epilogue. Tracy never contacted me again. Not about the kids, not about anything. The kids never asked for her either. With Wendy focused on other things, the bank finalized the sale of the store to a management and employee consortium. Henry, now a local hero, asked me to unveil a huge under new management banner. The store was back in business by the end of the first week. Soon, Wendy's bank account overtook mine. As agreed, she took her cash and left Mick with the mansion and some startup capital. Last I heard, they were still together, that is, until I ran into Mick. He mentioned his legal team was appealing the case, said some evidence shouldn't have been allowed in court. Coulson followed up and found that while their appeal was pending, the happy couple had gone on a month-long cruise in the West Indies. Pure coincidence, of course, that Mick received a fax while docked, one that revealed Tracy had a C-section and hysterectomy 9 years ago. That must have gone over well. And how could I possibly know they were in a country where hitting a woman is treated very seriously? Being a law-abiding man, I also never asked Wendy how a horde of homeless folks managed to get into the mansion and trash it beyond repair. And hey, if you leave your house completely unattended for a month, don't expect your insurance company to pay out. Now, where did I put the keys Beth gave me? And was that a burned-out Mercedes I saw off the highway? After my first year of college, I offered to work part-time while studying so we could balance things out. Wendy just smiled and said, "That's sweet, but I don't know how long I could tolerate being married to a man with no degree." Snob, but she's my snob.